Namaskar. Welcome to the first session on Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 2. To our friends in Kolkata, we have a special surprise for you. Experience the power of collective satsang at the in person talk series on Bhagavad Gita for an Extraordinary Life by Jaya Rao. It speaks about how the principles of Bhagavad Gita help us transform into extraordinary beings. The talks will be from 21st to 24th November, daily from 6:30 to 8 pm at Kalamandir, Kolkata. We are sure you know family and friends in Kolkata. Please forward them the invite on WhatsApp. Join Jayaji's WhatsApp community and stay updated on the activities. Click the link in the description to join today. You can catch up on all sessions of Bhagavad Gita chapter 1 with the links in the description. I now request Jayaji to commence chapter 2.
ॐ सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
Today, we're going to begin with the second chapter, which is a fascinating chapter because it's entitled Sankhya Yoga, the Yoga of Knowledge. Now, knowledge in life is so important, but particularly in the area of our personal interrelationships, our connections with the world, relationship with the world. It's so important because let's take the example of suppose you have to go from one end of a room to the other. And that room is beautifully decorated. It has exquisite furniture, great paintings, the most expensive paintings on the walls. It has all kinds of curios, carpets, stuff like that. Very exquisitely done up. But the room is in pitch darkness. What will your experience be? When you have to go from one end of the room to the other, your experience will be that of pain, hurt, you'll fall, you'll trip over something, you'll bang your knee against something or the other. So, your experience of that beautiful room is painful. Similarly, we are in this beautiful world, so wonderfully designed for our comfort, for every little detail has been taken into account. But our experience of life is painful, depressing, traumatic. Somewhere or the other, we get pain from somewhere. And then we complain that the world is bad. Huh? It is like complaining that there is something wrong with the room. There's nothing wrong with the room. Similarly, there's nothing wrong with the world. What is wrong is that we don't have knowledge. Just as to get from one end of the room to another, all you need is a candlelight. That's enough. You don't need bright lights like here. Similarly, in life, all you need is a little knowledge. And that little knowledge can make a world of difference to us. All the pain will go, the depression will be gone, the trauma will be gone. You'll be joyful, cheerful, enjoying every little aspect of the world. Today we don't enjoy. So, just as in a dark room you get hurt, and even a candle is enough for you to have an easy passage through the room. Similarly, in the world, all of us are experiencing grief because we lack knowledge. And therefore, knowledge is of the essence. Whatever else you do or don't do in life, you must gain this knowledge. Knowledge of what? First, knowledge of the world. What makes the world tick? How does the world function? What is the nature of the world? Second, knowledge of yourself. You might say, of course, I know who I am. No, you don't. Because when certain situations come up and you react in a particular way, it takes you by surprise. Isn't it? Sometimes you're angry, and other times you're jealous, third time, whatever comes out of you, you have never experienced before sometimes. And you don't know that it is part of you. So you need to know yourself, and then you need to establish the right relationship with the world. Otherwise, in a beautiful world, a wonderful you, the interaction can be painful. So let's take the world. You must assess the world. What is the nature of the world? Just as when you live in Mumbai, you must make an assessment of the city, right? What is the assessment of the city? That there will be traffic 24 hours a day. Huh? I know someone who is going to the airport at 2:30 in the morning, and they assumed that there won't be any traffic. And there was a huge traffic jam. They got to the airport barely in time. The climate, the weather in Mumbai is hot, hotter, hottest. There is no other option. So if you expect weather like in Switzerland, in Mumbai, you're sadly mistaken. You're going to be very, very disappointed and frustrated in life. Second, after assessing, you must understand that this is the way of the world, this is the way the world will function. It is not going to change just because I want it to change. In the monsoon, you decide to go out to a party, or you organize an open air party during a monsoon, and it rains, and you complain. Whose fault is it? That's why in England, they never plan anything open air, because there's no guarantee that it won't rain. Third, you must accept the world as it is. When I say the world, it's not just things, people that you are interacting with. And the fundamental understanding we must have is that you cannot change anybody else in the world. And the last person on earth you can change is your spouse. So don't even try that, because you're in for a lot of disappointment and a lot of frustration. You can't change anybody. Even the Bhagavad Gita says, Guna guneshu vartante. Gunas function, nature will function. What can restrain to? And then you can enjoy life. So when you assess the world, assess the people around you, understand that this is the way they function, accept them as they are, then it becomes a source of amusement to you. Suppose you have a partner, spouse, who's irritable. Otherwise, wonderful person, but irritable. And when there's a lady who complained to me once, And she said, she was really very angry. So she said, I've had it now. I'm parting company. I said, with whom? Then with my husband. So I just casually asked, how many years have you been married? She said, 35 years. And she said that her husband has a foul temper. So I said, 35 years you've been married? Is this something new that he started? She said, no, since the day I married him, he's been like this. So I said, 35 years you tolerated, now what is the reason for you to part company? Then I told her, you must make use of technology. You tell your husband tomorrow that as he turns the corner and he's 5 minutes away from home, ask him to give you a call and say, in 5 minutes I'll be there. Keep my coffee ready. Because she can't say, I need to prepare for your temper. So, and when he calls, you have 5 minutes to brace for his temper. So you have an assessment, you know that he is going to come home and start screaming about something or the other. Prepare for it. And when he screams, my husband is in perfect health. Suppose he were to come home and just be quiet, you should be very worried. Maybe his sugar levels have gone up, blood pressure has gone up, something is very wrong with him because he is not behaving according to his nature. Right? You get it? Assess, understand, accept, and enjoy. You try it out tomorrow with anybody around. Children. The nature of a teenage child is he will be rebellious. You tell the child very politely, beta, will you please do this? Go to hell. I will not. That's a teenager. If he were to quietly say, yes, Mama, I'll do it, and he's not your child. Then comes yourself. Who am I? What is my nature? What makes me tick? Do you know who you are? Say, you must have some idea of who you are. When you stand before the mirror, what do you see? Say out loud. Body, correct. This is not an IAS exam or something. Speak up. When you stand before the mirror, you see your body. Your body contains organs of perception. So the world enters you through your 5 organs of perception: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. And the body acts. So it has 5 organs of action and 5 organs of perception. So the body is the contact point with the world. And the body is your outer personality. It's like the body of the car. But the performance of the car doesn't depend on the body. Performance of the car depends on engine. So what is the engine within you that drives you to activity? I think there's an echo. Isn't there? Oh, anyway, let it be. So, what is the engine within you? Your inner personality consists of 2 distinct and different elements called the mind and the intellect. So, the mind is the realm of feelings, emotions like love, hatred, jealousy, anger, envy, so on and so forth. Likes and dislikes. You like your mother, you dislike your mother-in-law. In some people, it's the other way around. You like what? Chips. You dislike vegetables, maybe. I don't know. Just likes and dislikes. An impulse. This is the mind, which is by its very nature irrational. Suppose you like something and somebody were to ask you, why do you like it? Arey, what do you mean, why? I just like. There's no reason. Fortunately for us, we also have the intellect, which is the realm of discrimination between pairs of opposites. Judgment, it's decisive. Mind is indecisive. It's your rational aspect. So when you take a decision, the decision must be taken by the intellect after careful analysis. Then it's likely to be right. If your decision is based on mere whims and fancies of the mind, you're in for a bad time. So this is the body, mind and intellect. Body, outer personality, mind, intellect, inner personality. Is this all that you have? Huh? Sorry? Spirit, correct. The fourth component in you, the most important component, is the spirit in you referred to as Atman. Atman literally means self. So, it is Atman, the spirit in you, that lends life to the other lifeless components in you. Body, mind and intellect are lifeless, they have no life. But when Atman operates through the body, mind and intellect, there is a fabulous expression of life. You're alive, you're vibrant, you're energetic. Every movement that the body makes, every impulse that goes through the mind or emotion, every thought that flits through the intellect is empowered by, enlivened by the spirit, Atman. So, there is you and the world. And what part of you interacts with the world? Where do you operate from? What is it in you that you identify with is what determines the nature of your experience. So the body is the lowest, that which gives least happiness or pleasure. It's controlled by the other superior components in you. And yet, let's say 80-90% of our efforts or our thoughts are around the body, isn't it? The moment you wake up, you say, oh, I must exercise. Or worse still, what am I having for breakfast? So it's food, it's physical comforts, it's how I look, all of this matters. The emotions. The emotions give you far more pleasure because, see, the body can give you pleasure only when there is contact between the sense organ and the sense object. The moment that contact is gone, the pleasure is gone, isn't it? Let's say you've eaten biryani for lunch. Can you enjoy it now? No. Moment it's swallowed, is gone. Whereas the mind can flash back to the past, the day you got married, and enjoy it. Or a young girl can project into the future and say, when I get married, I will be happy. That is never going to happen, but anyway, she imagines. And it controls the body. So when you have a powerful emotion, whatever that be, grief, love, you forget about your hunger and thirst. So the mind controls the body. Then comes the intellect. Intellect, you can enjoy the victory of a competitor also, like in tennis. You know, those of you who are at least watch Wimbledon final or US Open final, you see the finalists, when they are playing, they fight for every point. But once it's over and you know the opponent has won, you know the opponent has played a better game of tennis, you congratulate him, you can celebrate the opponent's victory, isn't it? Although he's a competitor. With the mind, you can't. You can't enjoy brother-in-law's achievement if you don't like him. Then comes spirit. It is that elusive thing that you can't put your finger on, you can't feel for it, you can't conceive it, the intellect cannot contact it. But there is something in you that says there is something beyond what I can see, what I can feel. And that's what keeps you going. That's what gives you that energy and the vitality and the positivity and a never say die attitude. Just as without fuel, the most expensive car is immediately reduced to junk, isn't it? Without electricity, the most sophisticated gadget is totally useless. Similarly, friends, without the connect with the spirit, life becomes depressing. And therefore, it is so important to retain that connect. And the more often you connect, the greater is the energy and vitality you experience. It's like, when the internet was first introduced in India, what was it? You remember? A dial-up facility. So you had to dial up and you had to wait and wait because the demand obviously was more than the supply. And by the time you got connected, you got disconnected. It was so frustrating. So initially, our connect with the spirit is like that. By the time you somehow get yourself to think of God, it's gone. What are you thinking of? Oh, my daughter was supposed to do this. You're back to the world. But you've got to slowly build yourself up to having, like in the United States, the whole university is Wi-Fi enabled. The whole office, the whole building is Wi-Fi enabled. All you have to have is an instrument and you're connected. So wonderful. In China, I believe whole cities are like that. So that is the role of the spirit. Can you see spirit? Can you feel it? No. But you know it's there. It's like, do you see butter in milk? No. But you know there's butter in milk, right? And there is a technique of extracting that butter from the milk. Similarly, friends, you can't see the spirit in the world, but you know it's there. Even the worst agnostic atheist, somewhere deep down, believes that there is a factor beyond the known that makes the world tick. And there is a technique of extracting it. This is the technique, the Bhagavad Gita. So, all problems in this chapter, Krishna says emphatically to Arjuna and through him to all of us that all problems are internal. So you can't blame it on others. And these problems arise because of wrong identification, because you are identifying with body, mind and intellect instead of spirit. That is the starting point. And we are deep in it now. Isn't it? You're so deep in it that you don't know spirit. And the next is, you wrongly identify, then you get attached. You've gotten so badly attached to your body, mind and intellect that you've become the body, mind and intellect. Because the law is, as you think, so you become. Now, you trace back all your problems and you'll find that yes, it's true. It's wrong identification and attachment. So, before we proceed, let's take a look at this portion. Verses 1 to 53 of chapter 2 are considered as one portion, and 54 to 72, the last 19 verses, are the Sthita Prajna portion where Arjuna asks Krishna what is perfection in a human being, and he gives a brilliant answer in the last 18 verses. So we are taking the first 53 verses now, and after we finish this, we move on to the next 54 to 72. So the first 10 verses, Arjuna goes on about his sorrow. You remember the first chapter, entire 47 verses are Arjuna's sorrow. He continues now, 10 verses dealing with Arjuna and his sorrow. Then Krishna speaks, verses 11 to 25, and he transports us to another world altogether. If you're ready for it, you can soak it in. Indestructible spirit talks about Atman, the highest knowledge. Now you might wonder, here is Arjuna in sorrow, in grief. He's sitting there almost crying. And how does Krishna talk about the highest knowledge? How will Arjuna even understand? Even we don't understand. We find it difficult. There are two reasons for this. Number one, he needs to give Arjuna a shock treatment where he says, like that. So that he drops the grief at least temporarily and is available to take in knowledge. And second, to Arjuna, Krishna was only a friend. He didn't consider him as a guru. In fact, later he says, when he sees the Vishwarupa Darshan, Arjuna tells Krishna, said, please forgive me for all the times that I joked with you, that I, how friends do, tease each other. That was his relationship with Krishna. Now the situation has pushed him to communicate to Arjuna that, look, I have the knowledge to help you. And he achieves that. So anyway, the 11 to 25, he talks about the indestructible spirit. 26 to 30, he says, therefore, Arjuna, don't grieve, because there is no place in the world for grief. In life, there is no place for grief. Grief, sorrow, depression, what else do you call it? Mood swings. All of this are imaginary. And people seem to revel in that. Nobody wants to get out of their problems. That mumukshatva must be there, that desire to liberate yourself from the mess we've got into. That itself is not there. Anyway, then he says, in the midst of all this change and all that is happening around in the world, like today, you see what is happening. There is war going on in Russia. There's bombs falling all over the Middle East. We don't know what is happening between Israel and Lebanon. Even within India, all kinds of things are happening. United States, new president has been voted in. In the midst of all this, what should you and I do? Just perform your duty. If you're a carpenter, do carpentry to the best of your ability. If you're a plumber, just do what you have to do. If you're a financial analyst, do that. If you're an income tax officer, do that. If you're an artist, do art. Whatever it is that you are doing, what you think, consider is your duty, just do it to the best of your ability. And imagine what the world will be if all of us just did what we ought to do. That is not what we're doing. What are we doing? I'm sitting here and saying, you should be doing this. Then you are picking fault with somebody else. All of us together are picking fault with the Prime Minister. Government policy, this, that. What is not in your control, don't even think about it. What you ought to do, do that. You're not doing what you ought to do. Are you? And then you have the gall to say somebody else should do this. So perform your duty. And then 2-3 verses, 42 to 44, he talks about, this is probably the only portion in, and maybe the 16th chapter, where Krishna speaks of selfish people. Ignorant people, selfish people, what do? They indulge. Even when they perform puja, or they go to a temple, church or mosque, or they perform a ritual, or they go on pilgrimage, whatever they do, it is only for selfish reasons. Huh? There are so many people who go to Tirupati Balaji, where else? Shirdi, religiously every year. And they put X amount in the hundi. But what is this about? Oh God, please increase my profits. God, my son is 35 and not married. Please get me a good daughter-in-law. Many people come and ask me, you travel so much, why don't you find a good wife for my, what is that? Spiritual girl for my son. I say, that is a non-existent species. And the only way your son will find a spiritual girl is how? Correct. He must be spiritual, then he will attract a spiritual girl. What are you asking me? I am a total failure. I couldn't get a wife even for my own son. Where will I get for your son? So that is it. Then he talks about what is right action, verses 45 to 50. I'm not going to tell you, you'll have to wait till we come there. And the last few verses are the drama of realization, how you get to the last stages of being human, and then you explode into that state of realization. It's beautifully described. So for now, we begin with verse 1.
Sanjaya uvacha tam tatha krupayavishtam Ashrupurnakulekshanam Nishidantamidam vakyam Uvacha Madhusudanaha.
So Sanjaya speaks here. Sanjaya, as you all know, is the commentator of the entire war that is taking place in Kurukshetra. And Sanjaya and the blind king Dhritarashtra are sitting in Hastinapur. Hastinapur is like Delhi, the capital. And there is a Kurukshetra even now, which is quite a few miles away. And Vyasa, the author of the Mahabharata, had given Sanjaya the power to see what is happening in Kurukshetra. Perhaps there was live telecast in those days. So anyways, Sanjaya speaks at crucial moments. So he's speaking here and he's saying, Madhusudana, killer of Madhu, spoke to him who was overwhelmed with pity, krupaya vishtam, distressed, dejected, and in tears. What a state. For any human being to be in this state is pitiable enough. But here was Arjuna, a mighty warrior, commander-in-chief of the Pandava forces, reduced to tears, disgusting. So Arjuna's condition was physically, he had tears rolling out down his cheeks. Emotionally distressed, intellectually dejected. You're a human being and you have feelings, you must have feelings. And there are times when tears well up. Yes, they should well up, but never fall. Yeah? You should have the power to feel intensely and yet control. So, emotionally, you must feel emotion deeply, intensely, but not get affected. So you must have emotions, but not be emotional. Have sentiments, not be sentimental. That makes all the difference. And intellectually, you must never lose hope. There are these mighty warriors like his own son, who was cornered unrighteously by the Kauravas. He fought valiantly till the end, knowing fully well that he was going to lose and be killed. But he fought, he never lost hope. And here is Arjuna gone. So, in life, not only a warrior, all of us are warriors, right? We all have our own battles to fight. Your morale must always be high. Hmm? You must be fully charged at all levels, physically ready to go, emotionally charged up with emotion, intellectually convinced about whatever it is that you're doing. Otherwise, you collapse. Arjuna was incapacitated at every level, and he would have lost. He had lost the battle already at this stage, had it not been for Krishna who kind of pulled him up. So this was Arjuna's condition. And by the time the 18th chapter comes, it is Krishna who told him, I have told you whatever I have to tell you. Now it's up to you. Yatha ichchasi tatha kuru. Do whatever you like. So he doesn't tell him what to do. And Arjuna gets up and says, Nashto moha smritirlam. I've gained my memory, Krishna, my moha delusion has gone. It is your prasad. He acknowledges that it is Krishna's advice that has saved him. And he gets up, fights the battle, and wins it. And so can we, if we have the patience to go through till the 18th chapter. Wednesday after Wednesday. Every day, actually, it should be. So we move now to verse 2.
श्रीभगवानुवाच कुतस्त्वाकश्मलमिदम् विषमे समुपस्थितम् अनार्यजुष्टमस्वर्ग्यम् अकीर्तिकरमर्जुन.
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, this is the first verse, first time that Krishna speaks in the Bhagavad Gita. And what does he say to her? Oh Arjuna, how have you fallen into this dejection at this critical juncture? It does not become an Aryan. It is un-Aryan-like, means un-Indian-like. It is ignoble. Aryan means noble. And it will not get you either fame or heaven. Fame in the present, heaven in future. So there are three types of people. One works for happiness here. They just want happiness here and now. Immediate pleasure, instant pleasure. Majority of human beings. There are a handful of people who forego the present for future results, like Olympic athletes who work ceaselessly, tennis players. I remember one time Roger Federer was interviewed by the press and he said he won the Wimbledon and he allowed himself one night of partying, one day, one evening. He said, we partied like there was no tomorrow, we enjoyed ourselves. Next day he was back to his regime, training. That's how you have to work. You can't just say, I won the Wimbledon, next 6 months I'll party. It's not on. And there are people who don't even want the future, they only want realization. Like Sri Ramakrishna, when his brother sent him to school, he came back one day and said, what are they teaching me? They're teaching me about the world. I don't want to know the world. So he dropped out of school. I mean, that's easy. But he said, I want God. And it goes to his credit that at the young age of 29, he reached that state of self-realization. Amazing person. Nachiketa in our scriptures, when he went to Lord Yama and Yama said, why do you want Brahma Vidya? You're a young boy. You've got the whole world ahead of you. I will give you the wealth of the heavens. Not interested, disgustedly turned around, turned in the other direction. And there happened to be heavenly damsels dancing there. So Yama said very mischievously, you can have them too. That's when he looked him straight in the eye and told Yama, said, you keep your song and dance, Yama. Teach me Brahma Vidya. What a boy, young teenage boy. Huh? You don't even have to be young teenage. Old people are enough to fall for any temptation. So this is it. All three types of people, whatever it is you want, you will not get Arjuna. A Kirtikaram, you will not get fame in the present. A Swargyam, no heaven, no future. And it is un-Aryan-like. It's not befitting an Indian. Look at the magnanimity of that word. Aryan, it doesn't refer to a race. It doesn't refer to your caste or anything. Just noble. And in those days, all Indians were noble. That's why they were called Aryan. And Arjuna was among the greatest warriors at that time. So there was no reason for him to be in this condition. And then, oh, she's gone. The next verse. 3.
क्लैब्यम् आस्मगमः पार्थ नैतत्त्वय्युपपद्यते क्षुद्रं हृदय दौर्बल्यं त्यक्त्वोत्तिष्ठ परन्तप.
O Partha, son of Pritha, do not give in to this weakness, this frailty. It does not suit you. Drop this faint-heartedness and arise, O Arjuna. The very inspiring verse. So you see, the world is constantly provoking you. And wherever you're weak, you succumb, you fall. So he's saying, shed this weakness. This is not becoming of you. First of all, you're a human being, the most sophisticated of all species. And for you to fall for the world like this, ridiculous. Shed this weakness. Parantapa is another name for Arjuna, means one who destroys his enemies. This was his reputation. Anybody that Arjuna fought, if they had the guts to fight against him, would be destroyed. Most of them just ran away. So also you and I, and never mind what Arjuna was, you and I have this power within us to fight challenges. Challenges are not outside, challenges are within. Your own weaknesses, your own anger, your own frustration, your own complexes. It is what you say to yourself that matters. What are you constantly telling yourself? You're getting angry with people, you're ready to hit out at people, to scream at people. Then that is what you'll be. And you will never be able to tap into your potential. You have wonderful abilities. Tap into that. Don't waste your time looking at what others are doing. You are in your own Kurukshetra. All of us are in our respective Kurukshetras. Fight. Fight what? Not outside. Fight the evil within you. And learn the art of right contact with the world so that you're happy under any circumstances. So you see, this philosophy is about dharma. The dharma is not a passive thing. Dharma is about Shakti, strength. And abhihi means fearlessness. So you cannot be spiritual and fearful. You know, once Swami Vivekananda was in Banaras and a group of monkeys started chasing him. So he was running in fear. And the sadhu sitting by the roadside said, "Face the brutes." So he turned around, just looked at the monkeys, and they ran for their lives. This is the power you have. And you're running away from challenges, you're running away from people, you're running away from situations. This is disgusting. Many people tell me that spirituality or Vedanta is about passivity, weakness. It's not. First of all, it's about development of the intellect. And fighting is not just physical fighting. You should have such a strong intellect that you completely disarm any person who stands up against you. It's like in Shakespeare's play, Merchant of Venice. There was this Jew who somebody had borrowed money from him and was not able to pay back, and he, in the agreement, had said, "I will extract a pound of flesh." So Portia, the young lawyer, the lady, she goes representing him and says, "Sure, by all means, you can have your pound of flesh, but not an ounce more, not an ounce less, and there must be no blood." Gone. He was gone straight away. How can you cut the flesh from a person without blood? And how can you be sure that you're going to take exactly that 1 pound? So you see, this Shakti, the strength, is not just going and punching someone in the nose. That is brute force. We have the intellect, the most powerful instrument in the world, with which you can win victory over anybody. You must have a combination of strong intellect and goodness, which is, Krishna was the epitome of it. And no one in the world could get the better of Krishna. That is the strength that we have. So, we move now to verse 4.
अर्जुन उवाच कथं भीष्ममहं सङ्ख्ये द्रोणं च मधुसूदन इषुभिः प्रतियोत्स्यामि पूजार्हा वरिसूदन.
Arjuna now speaks. O Madhusudana, O Arisudana, killer of Madhu, the demon, and of enemies. How can I fight Bhishma and Drona with arrows when they deserve to be worshipped? Now see, what he says is true. But he is not looking at the totality. Bhishma was the patriarch of the family who gave up the kingdom for which these guys were fighting. What a noble soul, what an unselfish person. He was unbeatable. So Arjuna says, how can I fight him? He's like, he's my grandfather. How can I fight Dronacharya with arrows? He is the one who taught me archery. He didn't teach me physics and chemistry. He taught me archery. And I'm using that very knowledge to kill him. Right? It sounds, your hair stands on end when you listen to this. Just this. But look at the totality. What is the reason for their fighting the battle? For righteousness. The Kauravas, the Duryodhana had done all kinds of evil. And Bhishma and Drona happened to be on their side. Because Bhishma had given up the kingdom. So now he becomes an ordinary soldier. An ordinary soldier doesn't have the right to question the decisions made by the commander-in-chief, who was Duryodhana. Like Indian army, let's say you're a Jawan in the Indian army. The Jawan can't question the decision taken by the army chief. If the army chief says fight, you have to fight. You can't say, I don't think it's right to do so. So Bhishma took that stand. He was not foolish. He knew jolly well that since Krishna was on the side of the Pandavas, there was no way the Kauravas would win. Which meant sure death for Bhishma himself. Same thing with Dronacharya. He was only the guru of both the Pandavas and the Kauravas. And at that time, Dronacharya happened to be, or Dhritarashtra happened to be the king. Yudhishthir had gone over to both of them and pleaded with them, please don't fight in this battle. Be neutral. He asked him first to come over to the Pandava side. When they refused, he said, at least be neutral, step out. Because you don't have a stake in this battle. But both refused, and it was their choice to be with the Kauravas. Now, once this has happened, Arjuna can't take the stand that how can I kill them? You see, they happen to be soldiers in the enemy camp. That's all there is. But he doesn't see any of this. He doesn't understand that the quality of the action is determined by the motive, not the action itself. That the Pandavas' motive was noble. They only wanted to establish righteousness in that kingdom. They were only doing their duty. And it so happened that not only Bhishma and Drona, there were so many other good people on the Kaurava side who died. So Arjuna's problem is because of passivity. Many of us are like that. Many of us take the stand, how can I fight my brother? I mean, not that you should be fighting brothers, but if they are in the wrong, so be it. If you're strong, intellectually strong, morally strong, ethically strong, means you're on the side of the right, you can win any battle. However weak you may be on paper, like the Pandavas had only, the battalions they were only 7, and the Kauravas had 11. So the Kauravas were far superior to them. Yet, Pandavas won. And the Kauravas did all kinds of wrong things. Like Abhimanyu, they tricked him and slaughtered him brutally. Horrible things they did. So, you can't take a compassionate view of such crime. It's like going to a murderer and say, oh, I pardon you. Arjuna's problem is internal, not external. But he attributes it. See, when you wrongly think that the cause of your problem is outside you, you will never find a solution to it. So please remember one thing. Whatever be your problem, if your mind is agitated, the fault lies with you. It cannot be in the world. If you're agitated, the cause is within. Find out what is agitating. You can sit there and blame the world for janmas together. You won't improve even by 1%. It appears to be outside. Next verse. Yes. Sorry, what did you say? After conflict. It's not that you're on the wrong. So his question is, after a conflict, if your mind is agitated, does it mean that you are on the wrong side? That's your question, right? It's not a question of right side or wrong side. If your mind at any stage, during a conflict, before a conflict, at peacetime, whatever, if your mind is agitated, the cause has to be within you, because nothing in the world can disturb you except yourself. So you got to trace it back. to what is it, why am I disturbed? What is it that is agitating? So it's usually greed. You have expectations of somebody, and these expectations have not been met with. There could be a deep complex within, where you feel victimized and the other person has nothing to do with it. It's like if you have a bruise and your skin is raw, slight feather touch is enough to give you pain. So you say, oh, this has caused me pain. This hasn't, a napkin can't cause you pain. Why is it causing you pain? Because you have a bruise. Deal with that. Similarly, mentally, we all are bruised, badly bruised, for some reason or the other. And then if somebody says one little thing that happens to touch that particular thing, it triggers a reaction that has no connection with with what has been said. It is totally out of proportion with what has been said. So this is the law. If your mind is agitated, the cause has to be within you. So look within. Similarly, if you're happy, the reason is within. It's not external.
गुरून् हत्वा हि महानुभावान् श्रेयो भोक्तुं भैक्षमपीह लोके हत्वार्थकामास्तु गुरूनिहैव भुञ्जीय भोगान् रुधिरप्रदिग्धान्.
Now see what he's saying. It would be better to beg and eat rather than kill these venerable masters. My gratification of desires and wealth will be tainted with blood if I kill these respected elders. Now look at the confusion in his mind. Had he started the war to gratify desires? Where did that come from? Had he done it for wealth? See, this is what we mean. No? You don't know yourself. So, although on the surface Arjuna was a noble man, deep down he had desire. He had a craving for wealth. So, that is now coming up. And because he doesn't have clarity of thought, his mind is agitated, is bringing up all kinds of things. He is a warrior. And he's saying, it would be better to beg. I don't know how many of us would even think that. We are not kings. We are not royalty. We are not billionaires. But even we would never ever think of begging and eating. I can't even imagine such a thing. And for Arjuna to say that is ridiculous. Rather than kill these venerable masters, did he not know that he was going to kill these? That Bhishma and Drona were on the other side was a well-known fact before. And he had planned and, prepared for this war for years. This isn't something that's suddenly come up. What happened to all that? So this is called Rajasic intellect. When the mind has a powerful desire, it forces the intellect to think whatever you want to think, whatever your mind wants. So there is a wrong understanding of things. There is no correct cause and effect connection. There is a wrong understanding of what is right and what is wrong. For two people, Bhishma and Drona, he's going to sacrifice the whole nation. And how action and renunciation, where you should be proactive and take affirmative action, and where you should withdraw. You don't know. So he is in a bad way. Next verse 6.
न चैतद्विद्मः कतरन्नो गरीयो यद्वा जयेम यदि वा नो जयेयुः यानेव हत्वा न जिजीविषामः तेव स्थिता प्रमुखे धार्तराष्ट्राः.
Now look where he's gone. He says, we do not know what would be better, to vanquish them or be defeated by them. We would have no desire to live if we killed Dhritarashtra's sons who stand before us. Now, he is including Krishna in his confusion. But at least there is a doubt. You know, when the doubt seeps into your mind, that shows that that's a sign that you are open to knowledge. When you're firm in your wrong belief, then you're not open. Like, let's say a young girl has fallen in love with a guy and she wants to marry him. She says, no, I will marry him or I will die, Hindi movie style. Then she's not open. But when the doubt comes in, I'm not sure whether I should marry him or not. That is the first sign of knowledge. So that's a good sign of recovery. Then he is accepting his ignorance. And the third is where he surrenders to Krishna, which happens now. But look at the words he uses. We would have no desire to live if we killed Dhritarashtra's sons. But he is the commander-in-chief of the Pandava forces. He has planned the war for a long time, for many years. Because you have to get your allies, right? Other people to join you. None of that he takes into account. 7.
कार्पण्यदोषोपहतः स्वभावः पृच्छामि त्वां धर्मसम्मूढचेताः यच्छ्रेयस्यानिश्चितं ब्रूहि तन्मे शिष्यस्तेऽहं शाधि मां त्वां प्रपन्नम्.
The fault of pity has impaired my nature and I am confused about dharma. I request you, tell me precisely what is good for me. Teach me, your disciple, who has surrendered to you. So now the surrender is complete. He says, I am your disciple, I take refuge, teach me. Arjuna is looking inward for the first time since chapter 1. And he finds that something is wrong with him and seeks help. So you must have the humility to accept that. Arjuna was a prince. He's like a king. But he surrenders to Krishna. That humility was there in every king in India. Because they understood the corrosive effect of the corrosive power in wealth and power. You have a powerful person, the moment you earn that power, you're gone. Same thing with wealth. You get giddy with wealth. It's almost like getting drunk. You've seen a drunk person. There's no control over himself. A person who is giddy with wealth is also like that. Giddy with power, also like that. So, assertive goodness is the order of the day. Ajata Shatru is a term for a person who's assertively good. He says his enemy is not yet born. Means there is no person in the world who can gain victory over such a person. So, and see, this is not about being aggressive. There was a sadhu who had just a kamandalu. Sadhus don't have much possessions. But a thief came and took that away. So he had something else with him that the thief forgot to take. So he ran after the thief. The thief thought that the sadhu is running after him to catch him. And he tripped over something and fell. The sadhu went up to him and said, "You forgot to steal this thing, so I have come to give it to you." And that changed his life completely. Like in Les Miserables, similar story. A convict ran away from prison on a cold, wintry night when it was raining a lot and was looking for shelter for the night. There was only one place where the light was on and the door was open. That was the priest's home. So he rushed in because he was cold. And the priest was writing something, so he looked up at him, didn't ask any questions, and told the maid, "Please lay the table for two." So both of them had, there was a custom in the priest's home that when the priest was alone, food would be served in copper plate. And when there was guests, food would be served in silver plates. So there was the convict and the priest eating out of a silver plate. And after dinner, the plates were washed and the maid kept it in the guest room, in a cupboard in the guest room. And this convict was given that room to sleep in. After all, he was a convict, a thief. So in the middle of the night, he took the silver plates and ran away. The police caught him the next morning because they had eaten at the priest's house many times and they knew that the silver plates were his. So they took him to the priest, pushed him down on the floor and said, "Look at this ungrateful wretch, he took advantage of your hospitality and stole your plates." The priest looked straight at the cops and said, "What have you done, my sons? I had gifted these plates to him." You know what he did? He saved the guy. So, this had a tremendous effect on that convict. And in addition to that, he took gold candlestick stands that were on the table. The convict didn't see that. So he took those candlestick stands and just gifted it to the convict. That changed his life. So you see here, it's about assertive goodness, which is not necessarily about killing someone or beating somebody up or fighting a legal case against someone. It's about using your intellect to establish something, to establish the higher. So that's what it was. Next verse.
न हि प्रपश्यामि ममापनोद्यात् यच्छोकमुच्छोषणमिन्द्रियाणाम् अवाप्य भूमावसपत्नमृद्धम् राज्यं सुराणामपि चाधिपत्यम्.
I do not see how the grief that has scorched my senses will go, even if I gain unrivaled prosperous dominion over the earth as well as sovereignty over the gods. Means I gain everything, earth and heaven. So, you know what happens when you're caught up in grief? It seems like it's the end of the world. But one phone call, one discussion with somebody, one opportunity you get to speak about your problem is enough to remove it. That is why that's the value of having, they have suicide helplines and things like that. It's very, very valuable because you can convince someone that there is positivity around. But unfortunately, most of us succumb and perish. Arjuna fortunately had Krishna. And all of us have his word in the Bhagavad Gita. And that is why I appeal to every one of you. Please take the Bhagavad Gita, which is there in the pen drives, go home, listen to it or watch the video every day. Because you have no idea what will happen when. Do you know that now that we are in peace times, fortunately, we are not at war with any other nation. But do you know that our armed forces are on red alert all the time? They are battle ready or at least they should be, 24 hours a day. Because you don't know when you'll be attacked from where. Similarly in life, do you know what's going to happen next? Did we know in 2020, that the world will come to a halt because of COVID? One virus. We were chugging along happily. And it was like the carpet was taken from under our feet. So anything can happen, you know. You may be driving on Marine Drive, suddenly an accident happens. That's what happened to two people I know. So, I mean, I'm not saying don't be afraid. Don't say, oh, I don't know what will happen. It's about gaining strength. You don't know what will happen next. So, be prepared. And Krishna, Arjuna couldn't have found a better guru. Similarly, us, we couldn't have found a better guide, because Krishna had the love of a mother. And you can feel it in his discourse, right through the Bhagavad Gita. The overriding motivation here is just love, pure love. Father's care, a guru's knowledge, a king's protection, and God's grace. All of this combined was in Krishna. And we are lucky to be the fortunate recipients of this knowledge. So grab it. Our motto in Vedanta Vision is there should be the Bhagavad Gita in every home. Home doesn't mean just physical. In the hearts and souls of every individual. And then you'll see our entire society come up like there's no tomorrow. Because today we're just asleep. We're asleep to our power, we're asleep to our abilities, we're asleep to all kinds of things. And other people are ruling over us. That's the worst part. Anyway, next please.
सञ्जय उवाच एवमुक्त्वा ऋषिकेशं गुडाकेशः परन्तप न योत्स्य इति गोविन्दम् उक्त्वा तूष्णीं बभूवः.
Sanjaya said, addressing Rishikesha, Lord of the senses, thus, Gudakesha is another name for Arjuna, Lord of sleep, the vanquisher of enemies, declared to Govinda, cowherd Krishna, I will not fight, and fell silent. So this is the end of all selfish activity. The moment you're selfish, you're totally uninspired, there is no motivation within you, there is no energy, there is simply disgust for life itself. So you must watch out for that. You know? Always retain an unselfish goal. Always be inspired with something higher. Since we started a little late, can we take a few minutes to finish this verse? Which is just an analysis of selfish, unselfish, and selfless. So selfish we all understand. I don't need to explain. We are experts at selfish action. Unselfish is where you set aside your personal concerns and dedicate yourself to something, anything beyond yourself. It could be animal welfare, it could be taking care of cows, it could be orphans. Seva Sadan is doing work for orphans, taking care of orphans. There are so many causes that you can work for. But this is all within the world. The third, selfless, is where it's difficult to understand. Because you're neither working for yourself nor are you working for a cause. You only want to go beyond the world to the state of God realization. And this morning, someone asked me, but isn't that totally selfless? I mean, isn't that totally selfish? Because you're not concerned about other people. You're only saying, I should get to God. But you don't understand. When you get to God, you do the maximum service. Because what are you giving? You're giving Atman to everyone. So anyway, in selfish action, there is fatigue. You're tired. Because the mental agitation is what causes the fatigue. When you're unselfish, you're energized. When you're selfless, you're like a self-charging battery. You never run out of energy. Selfishness leads to boredom. Unselfish people are excited. And a selfless person is intoxicated with the spirit. Selfish people fail because selfishness, by its very nature, is self-defeating. In unselfishness, you succeed, you achieve success, and in a selfless person achieves the impossible. Selfish people are always fearful. They are afraid of their own children, that they will take away their wealth. An unselfish person is confident, and a selfless person is fearless. A selfish person is always stressed, unhappy. Unselfish person, much less stress, and a selfless person, no stress at all. Emotionally, a selfish person always feels isolated, lonely, even though he may be in the company of others. An unselfish person feels connected. He could be alone, but he feels connected with people. And a selfless person is in ecstasy because he has universal love. He loves all beings. In a selfish person, desires are constantly increasing. You're fanning desires. An unselfish person is reducing desires, and a selfless person has zero desires. And the law is that all selfish people are unhappy. So to the extent you feel unhappy, you must just understand. You don't have to tell anybody, just understand that I am selfish, therefore I am unhappy. That's the only cause of unhappiness. Unselfish people are happy. A selfless person has reached the state of infinite happiness. So with this, we end today's session, and we'll continue with this most fascinating chapter next time. Please spread the word and get more people to attend. We can accommodate more people.